Hello there. Happy
Hi.
Tuesday, everyone. Today, we're going to jump into talking about the need or the opportunity to fill the need for teams that are less experienced, junior team members in the design realm, and the opportunity to fill that gap or close that gap with a coach. So, when we talk about design, we are covering product design, service design, program design, and software design. And I think it's important that we cover the fact that it's about folks that are responsible for designing experiences and where there are opportunities to close gaps in their ability to see things from a more experienced lens, that some of those examples and how we close those gaps.
Yep. And I like you mentioned, it's not all about interfaces and software and applications. It is about services, programs offered, because all of those have an element of experience with them, right? And you want to engage with the people experiencing your program, product, whatever it may be. Yes.
Right. And a lot of organizations are in the situation right now where they've had to rely on less senior talent due to budgetary constraints. It's hard to find the right talent in some industries. There are a
Mhm.
lot of people that are looking right now, but there are still those gaps that exist. And the risk that you take in utilizing those individuals is disjointed experiences, rework and churn across your teams internally. And this results from, uh, at the highest level, being able to look at things from the 30,000 foot view and then being able to then go down to the 5,000 foot view, and having that ability to kind of flex what perspective you're looking at things to ensure that you have a cohesive experience.
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes, bringing in some of that experience does help. And I know I would say over the last couple of years, you and I have been involved in more and more and more projects where they have a team,
Hmm.
but they're a junior team, and they get a bit into it and realize they do have that disjointed experience, or their gaps in their coverage. Even they don't have the resources or they don't have the experience, and we're able to, yeah, come in, fill those gaps, but also help those less senior people, or maybe even there's the junior issue, but then there's also the issue of sometimes people don't have a human factors or a user experience background, and they're kind of thrust in the role. And I think just you mentioning that it's not all about just tangible products, but services, programs that are available. We're seeing more and more of that as well, because they don't need necessarily, there's no UI to create, right?
Hmm.
So you might have a product manager or even a project manager trying to drive the offering, whatever service that is, and they just, they're figuring out, hey, maybe we need to pull in, somebody with some experience from that human factors component of things.
Hmm. One opportunity that I've seen is, so when you think about design, and for some, in some instances and for some individuals, it's about that focus on the presentation, aesthetics, and that sort of lower level of detail. What I've seen in a number of instances is where there was an opportunity to step back and understand, like we've talked about before, that journey or that workflow. And I've had individuals in design roles even ask, should I be designing across that journey rather than being given the tasks, maybe in a Jira or other ticket system for software, in the
Mhm.
software example, but not understanding that when you work on something in isolation, you've got to recognize that that piece fits into a bigger puzzle. And
Yes.
so that journey is what you want to use as that bigger picture. And the risk of not doing that is when you get into the experience of something, you risk not having the context of your user and how they are just walking up and using something, or they're walking up and experiencing something. And if you haven't gone through the things in that methodical way, they may not understand where to pick up and get involved or interact because they weren't considered in all those design, the components of that design.
Right. Or back to they didn't have the experience to know there's a system at play here that may not even involve some of their product or services, right? There are other things in use by users or influencing that journey or an element of it. And sometimes I do think that takes um, just experience,
Yeah.
to know how to go in there, know what to look at, whether it's through observation, through existing data, through interviews, whatever it may be. And I do think that's where sometimes a coach comes in. We haven't used that word, but coaching is really important in those cases when you do have those junior people or people without that skill set, again, who've been thrust into that role. I think the designer, like a visual designer, is a perfect example. A lot of people go, you're a visual designer. That means you're human factors or researcher along with it. So now that's your role as well.
Right.
And again, I'd say most of our engagements over the last couple of years we've ended up splitting about 50% of our time coaching the junior teams with, um, you know, how to proceed, and even giving them templates for future projects. Here are the things you need to do. Let's watch them do it. Let's give them feedback, or come in on demand for people
Right.
or organizations.
And what you just mentioned, that the important component of that is those templates. You risk when you don't have those templates, you don't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
so those templates are useful tools that the teams can then, or team members can pick up and use in the future. Also knowing when to inject validation efforts. So when do you check in with your internal team to validate, but also when do you check in with your customer to validate ideas, and knowing when to do that. There's an art and science to that. So that means that you've got to understand what level of detail do you provide for that feedback, but then also the timing of getting that feedback. And on the flip
How?
side, how to get that feedback exactly. And then on the flip side of that is, how do you facilitate the conversations internally and the collaboration? And when you don't have that skill set on your um, design team, you risk having ineffective channels for feedback. You risk individuals giving your design team feedback that's not effective.
Yeah.
So what starts to happen is that churn starts to rear its ugly head and increase, because everyone has the best of intentions, but they're not working in ceremony.
Yes. So you actually end up sometimes losing that human centered approach.
Hmm.
I'm so glad you brought that one up, Kenya, because that's a really big one, especially when it comes to junior staff. And this isn't any smack at product managers, but how many times have we seen, we've coached them through, getting good data, the when, the how, the who, all that kind of good stuff. They have some pretty good data, and they really don't. I don't want to say don't have the chops, but they don't have the experience of, how do I champion this? How do I communicate it back to our storytelling? How do I tell the story to make
Hmm.
people understand this might be important? And when they find themselves in that position, very frequently we see they just stop. A product manager isn't buying in because of either the way it was presented or it wasn't convincing enough, and all that data just kind of falls by the wayside, and some important stuff. So I'm really glad you brought that one up, because there's the getting it, but then there's knowing what to do with it, and how to leverage it, in that collaborative component.
And one of the things that I feel come with experience in that how component of how to communicate it is how you frame the same information in a different way based on your audience. So when you think about an audience that's primarily comprised of your business, your marketing, your sales, how you frame that information, the value of what you've gathered in terms of the feedback around concepts or how those concepts relate to the overall strategy of the organization, understanding how to frame that for the business is different than, or your program manager is
Yeah.
very different than your team that has to implement or develop or execute. And so you've got to understand that story that you tell to the business, and when I say business, sales, marketing, etc., versus the pieces, the specification that you communicate to those that have to implement or instrument what
Yes.
you found, but also what you've created. So it's what you've created, the feedback around those things, and then what that means to the next steps for those partners that you have across the organization. That requires, in a lot of instances, that requires modeling the behaviors of people who are more experienced
Yes.
or having them help guide your effort rather than you thinking that it's kind of one size fits all and what I communicate will work for everyone.
Right. And it doesn't. We've all, I think we've both had, we're presenting to more the executive leadership versus the product manager who you're trying to convince this is a problem, prioritize things versus your development team, who you're trying to guide with the findings as well in terms of the specs. That's exactly right. There's a different approach
Mhm.
for all of those people because you have a different objective. You want to tell the story to all of them, but how you tell that story and what you emphasize based on what you're trying to gain is very, very different with those
Yeah.
three. We usually end up with 2 or 3 presentations, in fact, um,
Mhm.
because there's kind of that executive readout that what you need to show the executives the value of something or where things are going versus product management where you really want to influence that roadmap, priorities, maybe requirements, and then the development team who you want to take those requirements. And one, you want them to know why they're doing it because you always, everything's better when people are participating and
Mhm.
collaborating and understand that problem they're trying to solve. But it's still very different because in that case, you want them to have some of those details for how do we solve this problem. So,
That's right. And organizing, as you talked about that, presenting is one component of it, but you also think about that working activity where you are either sharing concepts with the different members of the team or you're trying to progress ideas around concepts.
yep,
And that's where you have your workspaces like a mural, a Miro, you
yep,
have different tools that are like those that can help you communicate ideas and get input from others. You have to also understand when it's time to use those tools or those sorts of engagements with the team. Again, that requires an understanding of when to fit those things in and with whom to engage around them.
yep.
What I've also recognized is sharing your ideas. So I've seen where teams have shared with us the Figma files, for example, and it's
Mhm.
just the static files, and we're expected to provide a reaction, feedback, but they're just static screens. And so what I found is, getting them to understand, going back to that journey, share things in a way that it allows someone to follow the journey or path of your user's experience. That then allows for more richness around, okay, do these things work together? Does it make sense in terms of workflow, mental models of your users, and that sort of thing? That as an early career designer, you may not presume or understand that those things are necessary.
Right.
And that's where you need someone. outside of the team that you are presenting to. You need someone to help fill that gap so that that individual has the support that they need to then be able to communicate more effectively across the team.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, that's again, that's where a coach can come in. And by the way, there's also that having a coach, an active coach, can also be a very cost-effective way of,
Mhm.
I don't want to say training, but pretty much prepping and help guide some of those junior people who may not have senior people within the organization really mentoring them.
That's
So
right.
that's another. It really is a cost effective way of doing it because it can be project based. It can be on demand. You know, we just need you around, or we have routine meetings. We've had that with people where we just meet once a week, twice a week, move to once a month. You know, just to bounce ideas, to do reviews, to provide guidance of that when, how, what, type of input.
Yeah, yeah, and the reason why this is such a timely conversation is those of us that came through the ranks decades ago, or even years ago, had the experience in many cases of having those more senior people on the team who could coach us through these activities. But today, a lot of organizations are running lean
Yes.
and don't have that, and that's why you've got to invest in that so that you can sharpen the skills of the and invest in the team that you do have.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
any final thoughts before we wrap for today?
No, I think, I always like the conversation around, coaching. It's some of my favorite activities when we have projects. It's working with those newer or, people in different roles who are going to have to take on what we're swooshing in for a project. So, consider it. I think people should consider it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that even if you have, we've come in for lunch and learns, where the
Yep.
coaching is targeted activities that are not attached to a specific project, but it might be sharing a different strategy or method that their team can employ in their day-to-day work, and then they learn about it in that lunch and learn, and then they take it and utilize it, and then come back for with questions and
Yep.
did I do this right? How do I get the team to consider blankety blank? So it gives you the opportunity to kind of inject educational moments.
Yes,
Educational
exactly.
moments. That's a good way to put it. So thank you so much for listening in today. If you have any questions, you can contact us at info@leangeeks.net. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.